And this first segment of the day, we will have Chris Phillips, senior technical staff and member senior technical staff member and master inventor at IBM, about how to grow your API consumers. Extremely important, as we can see with Amadeus previously, and with Marshall van Alstein at the beginning of the conference. Hello, Chris. How are you doing today?
Hi there. Good evening.
Perfect. Your slides are
you.
great. You can share it with us. I'll let you the floor for 25 minutes.
Sure. Thanks very much. So before I begin, I just want to say the last presenter did an excellent job. And I really agree with nearly everything he said. I just wanted to call that out because I don't think we do enough positivity in the world. So he did a great job. So if someone could tell him that, because he's probably already left, I'd appreciate it. But let's get on to this topic here. Hi, well, I'm Chris Phillips. I'm part of IBM. I'm an SCSM or Senior Technical Staff Member and an IBM Master Inventor. What really do I do? Well, I'm considered an API guru by the sales organizations, and I'm one of the guys that goes around the world talking to a number of clients who are generally in trouble, but not always, around that API strategy with our products. And I sit there and I understand what they're trying to do, and we try and both technically solve their challenges, as well as understanding what they're trying to achieve and put strategies in place to assist them trying to achieve to meet their goals. And because generally I don't see good projects, I only see projects that have gone wrong because that's the nature of my job. And so we try and make sure we take the learnings from those experiences to provide to everyone else and come and do sessions like this. I have a blog. I write lots of stuff on it. Some of it's interesting, some of it's not interesting. If you want to take a look, please feel free. If you want to get hold of me, please send me a message via LinkedIn. So I'm here to talk about sort of how to grow your consumers. But before I delve into the core topic of it, let me give you the background for this. From what I've seen and from what my expectations are, I believe the world is changing. Today, lots of people are being measured by how much they can enable with their APIs. So how many of the facilities can they enable? This could be internal, this could be external. It's how many facilities can we put out there that Fred can go and use, or George in his garage, or Bob in accounting can come on board and use. And it's all about enabling stuff here. And they could, people say things like, oh, we've enabled 3,000 APIs and every API has one or two consumers. But I think we're going to start seeing things changing more and more, because we're going to start seeing that I think teams are going to start being measured by how many people are being enabled with their APIs. So you have 1,000 APIs and each has a single user. It would be much better if we could instead expose 50 APIs and each have 20 users. And to try and meet that, I think we need to change and look at how we approach both API design and exposure. I'm going to repeat some of the things you heard in the previous session, everyone. And the key thing here is to understand who your consumer is. So the same takeaway point again as the previous session. And because if we start measuring on who our consumer is, or how many consumers we have, or how much reuse are we seeing inside the business, then we're going to start seeing different needs and different focuses. And it's not how quickly can we expose function. It's how low can we set the bar for complexity for consuming our APIs. And I believe that's going to be critical in the next 2 to 3 years. So what do we mean by that? So I've got sort of 2 or 3 main points in this short session. I don't want to overload too much like I normally do here. And I am going to use the similar strategies I normally do, is I ask you questions to ask yourself and give you some good practices afterwards. So growing your consumers falls into one of 2 camps. It's bringing new consumers into your ecosystem. This is critical because if you don't get new blood in, there is only so much money you can take out of some people. But also it is getting those existing people you have and getting them to grow more and more and more and use more and be more embedded and more integrated and consuming more of your ecosystem. So whether this is, again, quite a lot of people say, well, everyone has to use our APIs because that's what we expose internally. But do they have to use the APIs you have, or can they demand new APIs? Or can they dictate your strategy as the consumer and making it harder to manage and govern everything? So these are the 2 ways I'm splitting this session into. So, firstly, how much does it cost for you to onboard a consumer today? Now, this could be internal, this could be external. Could be, do you want to advertise it? Do you want to just have the time for you to go and register a user? Or how about how much does it cost a consumer to start using your APIs? So again, if this is inside your business, you need to go and find Fred in the accounts team. He has to come work out how to get access to your APIs, how to start writing code, writing the code to use them. He probably has a coding background, but he won't know all the intricacies of your APIs. How long does that take? How much does that cost the business to get him up and running? But if you're trying to look at the existing people, is how much does it cost you to maintain a consumer? Is that more or less than the onboarding cost? Normally it is less. Those are always some exceptions out there. But now you've published an API. If you change this interface massively, you're going to cause consumers to have problems. And how much does it cost a consumer to continue using your APIs? So hypothetically, if you change your API so that you rewrite the interface to be more intuitive, more logical, fitting your business model, and this impacts 1,000 API consumers, how many of those are going to want to make the change? Are you then going to be managing both the version 1 of the old way of doing it that doesn't fit your best practices, as well as version 2 that does fit your best practices? How do you motivate your consumers to move across? And how do you do it in such a way that's controlled, that isn't going to make them start looking at other options or making other demands? So the key things to take away from this, I like to say, is the good practices I want to recommend is version control and very few breaking changes. Now, this is obvious to everyone. But the key thing here, the thing that ties into this so clearly is when I say version control, I don't just mean have a standardized version system. I mean, control the number of versions of an API that you have published. Understand why each version is out there. If you have 75 versions of the same API, as one of my clients once did, that's not 75 completely different functions. This is 75 versions of a single API. Then how are you managing that? How are you maintaining it? How are you controlling it? But also, we all accept breaking changes will have to happen from time to time, but make it so it's very much the exception. It's not just the fact of upsetting your consumers, causing them to have to spend time to replace it. This will break your trust with your trust with your consumers. They will start saying, well, if I'm going to have to rewrite the whole thing, what's the competitors doing? Is that cheaper? Is that more interesting? Is it provide more details? Understand the consequences. There is no island here. There is no, we are the only game in town. Okay, some banks may declare they are, but if you want to get the best out of your consumers, you've got to treat them like friends. Have a developer portal. Remove the back office cost. Developer portal is great. Developer portal is your shop window. This is where you advertise your APIs. This is where you advertise your wares. This is where you explain to your audience what's available, what your strategy is, and most importantly, how they use it. And if they can self-service sign up because that meets your business model, awesome. That means they can start using the system and you don't have to get involved. It's not always possible, but if you can do that, you can make it so easy for people to start using your system that then they'll come on, they'll start playing swiftly, and then you'll suddenly discover you have more users than you realize. Or you may discover you have more users than you realize. Oops, on the wrong screen. 1 second. Take into consideration the value of making breaking changes versus the cost to the consumer. So as I said before, if you decide to make a breaking change or even add an optional attribute, what's that impact going to be to the consumer? And you all may say, well, optional attributes won't have an impact because it's backwards compatible. Well, it is. But if you also have a rollback first approach to problems, so for example, you publish your new API with your optional attributes, and then 2 weeks later you discover a problem, so you roll back to the old version, that old version will then break anyone depending on that optional change. So again, that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do, but understand what the impact to your consumers will be. And things like monetization, directly monetizing the API calls versus as how much will that generate you versus what's the other cost you can get from the system, such as seeing consumer patterns, looking at the analytics, partnering with these people. How much innovation and new ideas can you get versus the money you can make from monetization? That's not to say monetization doesn't have a place. It does. But monetization always will increase the barrier or make developers less keen to get involved because there's a cost. And so my statement here is think like your consumer, which is very similar to the tagline for the last session. So I'm going to move on to my second core point here is consistency. How do consumers get started? So how do your consumers know what to use? How do they know how your APIs work? Are your APIs documented with examples? Do you have a sensible data model out there? Are you inheriting APIs or are you building from a green field? If you were brand new to this system, how long would it take you to learn to start using your APIs? And again, this is true for both external and internal consumers. As soon as you're starting, the people consuming your APIs are a different team from those who are actually building the APIs and designing the APIs themselves. Frequently, we're still seeing APIs designed purely around the data model that's being exposed from the system of record. And that's not always suitable because it's not always intuitive because it may have 20 years of development and evolution and organic growth. So always take a step back and say, if I was a consumer, how much of this could I understand without requiring 15 years experience in the business? But also, how many developer portals do you have? I was chatting to one of my clients today who say they have 6 different API platforms with 3 different portals. Okay, numbers made up to protect us, but they had multiple developer portals enabled from a variety of different products. How are your developers knowing which one to use? And there's nothing wrong with having multiple developer portals at all. Ideally, they'll all be our software, but there's nothing wrong with it. Providing you can explain, again, what each developer portal is. If you have, say, if you have a consumer who is consuming APIs from one developer portal, then has a new project that they want to build, a new idea, a new business direction, and they want to use another set of APIs, why do they have to go to a different developer portal? Why are they not all pushed and advertised together? It is acceptable to have multiple developer portals when you have multiple audiences, in my opinion. So if you have your business-to-business vendors, your internal APIs, your public external APIs, those could all have their own developer portals to provide that separation and security. But frequently I see clients who go, oh, we've got our mortgage APIs are here, our banking APIs are here, our balance APIs are here. And if you want to write an app, you'll need to use one of those 3 systems. This creates confusion and, quite frankly, frustration for the consumers. And a frustrated consumer is one who's less keen to continue or more keen to try and change things to make their life easier. We should be trying to make their life easy as soon as we can. And also, and again, I don't want to dig into this point too much because the last session covered this very well, in my opinion. Do the APIs follow the same pattern? Do your mortgage APIs have the same principles for return code? Do they have the same data model structure where the data is similar? Do they have the same approach to paths? And are multiple operations done at the verb level and path level, or different operations done as different APIs? There isn't one magical answer of this is the right way of doing it. The wrong answer is having the same contained API family using multiple patterns. Without consistency, people are going to struggle. And how frequently do your APIs change? Not going to dwell on the backwards compatible issue. I may have hit that recently, so I keep coming up. But even if you're changing from version 1 to version 2 and it is a backwards compatible, how much do your consumers have to do their side? Hopefully very little. Hopefully that's something that can be fully contained if it's all that change can be fully done on the provider side if the interface has not changed. But if the interface has changed or other things, or even you just want to keep them updated, people are scared about regular change. So even telling them there's no impact to you, many large organizations will still want to sort of regression test everything with these new APIs, just in case, because their business depends on it. And how many versions are live for a single API? I've been through this analogy already, but always keep coming back to ask yourself, why do I have 6 versions of this same API? Why do I have more than 2 versions of the same API? 2 is the correct answer, in my opinion. You have the current one, you have the previous one. But there are always going to be exception cases. So long as there is a justification that's acceptable to the technical side and the business side for why this is creating additional cost, that is how I would look at it. So the good practice to take away from this is single developer portal per target consumer group. And an example of the consumer group is business to business people. Not each business would have their own one, but everyone who's considered a business to business person will access the same developer portal. You would have your internal developer portal. You would have your external developer portal. And one of the questions I frequently get asked is, why do we need a developer portal for internal consumers, the people inside our business? And my response always is how much time do you want your API developers helping people inside your business? You should treat them exactly the same way as you treat your external people, in the sense that all the documentation is there. It's all self-contained. And yes, they will still have to answer the occasional question, but the emphasis here should be on occasional. They shouldn't need sort of immediate long-term help from the development team. And if they do, it means your APIs are not good enough, and to go back and revisit those. And if your internal teams are having issues there, your external teams are definitely going to have issues. A consistent API approach, consistent models, consistent definitions, consistent language. Make it as easy as possible to come on board. Clear and centralized documentation. You don't want people having to go all over the place, because no one will ever bookmark 3 different sites. They will bookmark one site, and that's where they expect to find everything, or at least links to everything that they need, both internally and external. And include not just the high-level description, but error codes, reasons, data models, examples, sample code, as well as onboarding instructions. And most importantly, think, what does your consumer need? If I was the consumer, how would I start using this? How would I start using this that does not involve interrupting the API development team who are building the APIs? Because at the end of the day, we need them to produce code. We need them to get the APIs out there. And finally, the last section I want to cover in my last minute, so I'll speed up, apologies, is how do consumers find your developer portal? How obvious is it? How do consumers ask for help? How do consumers find out about changes? And how do consumers help out each other? And finally, how do you make consumers feel valued? Apologies for the English there. How do you encourage and take the feedback and adapt given the feedback? And this is how do you complete the circle of communication all the way through the feedback circle. So the good practice here is engagement is key. If you don't engage with your consumers, then you're missing a trick here. They're the ones that tell you what's good and what's bad. Blog examples of how to use the APIs. Do basic marketing of your stuff, because the more people you have using it, the bigger the success you will be, and the more people you can adapt to meet the API needs. The more people you can adapt to meet what the API provides, the less specific APIs you'll probably have to develop in the long run. Provide social facilities that allow users to ask for help. This sounds obvious, but use forums. Use Stack Overflow. Get the engagement there. Maybe get your developers to have a look at it occasionally, not as a core part of their job, but just to engage with them, to understand the pain points and how do we address the pain points. And provide clear feedback system to allow your consumers to provide feedback. Maybe that's just an email address. Maybe it's a ticketing system. Maybe it is, I don't know, a meetup in their city, if it's but understand a route. Getting this feedback is critical. And finally, think like your consumer. Understand, if you were consuming this stuff, how would you want to work with your team? So the one thing to take away if you want to grow your consumers, if you haven't already worked out where I'm leading with this, is think like your consumer. Understand exactly how they would be. Because if we don't think like our consumer, we're not going to have the consumptions that we want. So thank you, everyone. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, for that. I will just start by a first question. We have a 30-second lag with the platform and the live, so just waiting for all the questions to be asked. Just someone first, we already have a comment from Rahib who say, "Cannot agree more. Additional attribute is still consumer impacting," and so yeah, it's true that optional fields. Some people believe it's not breaking, but it's still impacting, right? And actually can impact.
And it's not impossible to break on the rollback approach as well. But yes, it is consumer impacting, and change scares people sometimes. Yep.
I don't know if you know this famous. I don't know if you know this famous XKCD drawing, right? We'd say like I think it said we stop overheating. Like when you touch the spacebar, but the spacebar touch on the keyboard, right? So we stop this to happen and say, oh no, I was actually using this for. You always break something. Someone workflow when you are changing something, right? You always change something.
It's how we keep life interesting. It's how we keep life interesting. We take something that's not important, change it, and then half the world is upset by it. Yeah.
Totally agree, Chris. We have one question about the adoption versus design. How can you know if your API is great? Because either you have a great value, so people will consume it anyway, even if you don't have a great docs. Because actually, yes, this is like the Twitter API, for example. Like even Twitter at some point it has been really, really bad on design, or Facebook has been really, really breaking a lot of APIs. They were a monopoly. Actually, a lot of people had to use it at some point. Versus a great API design versus in a really competitive environment where, SMS API or emailing API, like how do you manage the adoption versus the developer experience, let's say, impact on subscriptions?
This is a brilliant question, one that I cannot answer in less than 14 days and 6 hours because there's such a huge thing. How do you manage it? You have to understand that when you make a large change to move to best practices, you're going to impact your consumers. If you have 2 consumers, that may be an acceptable risk. If you have 1.6 million consumers and you have a monopoly, possibly that's an acceptable risk. If you have 5,000 consumers, you don't have a monopoly, that's possibly not an acceptable risk. And it's understanding the risk management here. And that's the key thing, really, is how much of the risk are you prepared to take? If you are making a change, you will probably lose some consumers if you have a large number, depending on the size of the change. And that's a business decision of what is the impact and market. And it comes back down to the usual market research. Talk to your community, explain why you're making this change, give them time for the change over, and all the support and care that you can, and nurture your community. If you know you're going to be upset them, get in front of them, get ahead of them, and alert them ahead of time.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
To get first.
We have a question from Pat Young. How do you walk the line between providing content that is focused to noobs, right, on noob developers versus seasoned developers who may be looking for more robust content? Like, is there any difference in the way to doing it?
I don't think the content is different. The style may be different. But the way I look at this, so I'm not a prose writer. The way I would look at this is you should have the content there for a seasoned developer. But you should have the samples there for, as you call it, a noob. I would never use that term, but a noob. And understand that even when a noob is eventually going to get to the point where he's going to be seasoned, and it may get there quicker than you expect. So providing the samples to get them started and the 101, but then still you need to provide that deep level of context. If not just for your consumers here, that has been the focus of my session. You need that to ensure that your team knows how it works, that your team understands how it goes. So if your API developers all get offered $1 billion to go and work for someone else, and you lose your development team, the next generation can come in and pick up supporting them quickly. And that's an important thing here. This is the documentation side of this. It's not just for your consumers. It's also generally for your in-house support as well. because say we all know what happens when developers change roles and there's no one to take backfill straight away. The knowledge can often get lost.
Yeah, in a past conference, speaker said, yeah, your documentation has to be multi-sided for the newcomer, the beginner, the product manager, for the debugger, the one who comes, to debug the existing integration, the one who discover. It has to be multi-sided, right? With multi facets to be able to answer everyone. It's really hard. And I remember a quote from Bruno Pedro. Now he's working at Postman these days, but he said, an API is as good as its documentation. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Or
I would say if an API doesn't have documentation, it doesn't exist. Is the phrase I use internally. It's very similar. It's not quite good as that. So, but his phrase is better. It's as good as its documentation, because if it doesn't do anything, it doesn't need documentation. As soon as it does something, you need to have some explanation.
You don't believe you have backend wizards developers who are able to find endpoints and parameters? No.
Oh no, they do exist, but then they keep getting new jobs and changing.
Yeah. So
that's the worst problem when you got one of them, is then they leave. We all know magic is there. In other words, they know who to buy for buy a beer to get the information out of. And this is actually a serious point. To go from your joking point to a serious point here is, there are people that will go out there and actively find this information out to help them consume our APIs. But they do that by talking to the people who build and maintain the APIs. This takes the guys who build and maintain APIs focus away from building new APIs. So that's actually a bad thing, a net bad thing, because it's slowing down the new APIs being designed. By having all this available up front, you just stop their need from having to get distracted. Does that take your jokey point into a serious point? But it's a valid point you made.
Yeah, there is always a serious point in a joking point. So yeah, we're here on that.
Is.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Some congratulations on the chat. Thank you very much for being there with us.